Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jake Milstein. I run marketing and host events here at CI. We're doing a joint webinar here with Goldbond, and we're really excited to be doing this. Obviously, with all the news in the last week about the pipeline and ransomware on the pipeline, everyone's thinking about cybersecurity. So, hot topic, and we're here today to talk about defending distribution against disruption. I'm going to turn it over to Wendy Divinasbury, who I think you all know, and she's going to take it from here and hand it over to Mike and Scott and Andy. And one thing to know right before he starts talking is over on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a chat. And so if you have questions that come up, put them in the chat. We'll make sure that your questions get answered. And if we can't answer it here, we'll answer it later. We'll shoot you an email, but we'll try to answer it here as we go. And if you stay through the end, there are prizes and a survey because we want to know how we're doing. So stick around with us. Wendy, all yours.
All right. Well, welcome, everybody. Thank you for participating. Today, as Jake mentioned, we're going to be talking about the rise that we see in cybersecurity and crimes. And because of that, Goldbond has partnered with CI Security to offer our members help in that area as far as managing detection and response. And they are a consulting service for us. So we are sharing that with our members. And as was mentioned, the recent ransomware attack, how does this affect food service distribution? We're going to talk about that today. And we're also going to talk about, what part of your business is most vulnerable. And beyond that. So I just want to really quickly introduce our presenters here. We've got Mike Hamilton with CI Security. He's been in the information technology and security industry for over 30 years. And then most of you are familiar with Scott Sparkman, our Director of Information Technology at Goldbond, and Andy Saline, who is our Network and Systems Administrator in our Technology Department. And once again, I want to remind you, if you have any questions, put it in the chat. And now I will turn it over to Mike and Scott and Andy.
Okay. Thanks, Wendy. So what I'd like to do is kind of go through a short deck here, not very long, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and just kind of frame the discussion with some current events and some other things that might not be as familiar to a lot of you as they are to me, because I sit around and read security news all the time. So here's a few headlines. These things are extremely recent. And in fact, that USDA comment period is open right now, and it's not a bad idea to register your thoughts when those comment periods are open. But food distribution has been getting hit lately, and we'll talk about why in a little minute. But look at some of the number there: $7.5 million ransom. Now, with this ransomware scourge, right, it's extortion. What they're doing is they're extorting money out of businesses by disabling their ability to operate. The initial extortion demand always gets negotiated, and so it doesn't end up. So you heard about the Colonial Pipeline, and they ended up paying out $4.4 million. There's a lot of backstory behind that. I'm pretty sure that DHS was in there standing on some necks saying, you will make energy come out the end of that pipe right now, whatever this takes. But I'm pretty sure that demand started at more like $20 million. So you're not immune in food distribution to this kind of thing. And there's a few reasons why that probably makes some sense. And one of those is, in food distribution, you don't consider yourselves to be a target. You're not a bank. You're not a retailer that's processing lots of credit cards. You're not a hospital that has records to steal that can be monetized. But you are in a business that is extremely time sensitive, and an outage starts to pile up the loss on a permanent basis right away. And this is the kind of organizations that these gangs are directly targeting. And it's because of the inability to survive downtime, especially when you have perishable inventory. We all know how that works out. There's also this nexus with restaurants, grocery stores, anybody that handles food. You're the supply chain for that. So, honestly, what you're hearing from the federal government now in terms of the executive order that came out last week and some pieces of legislation that just passed the House of Representatives this week, you're going to hear about supply chain security until we are all sick about hearing. And the reason is because the notable events that have occurred recently with SolarWinds Exchange, Excellion, et cetera, these really were due to being having part of the vendor space, the service providers that the actual targets have all contracted. That service provider will be used as a launch point to get to all of those targets. And this has happened over and over and over again. So this is not random. This is planned. These are businesses. They do research and they know how to maximize their return on investment. You see there's the Food and Agriculture sector-specific plan. Let me just explain a little bit about that. If you're not familiar with the ecosystem that is the Department of Homeland Security's critical infrastructure protection, there are today 16 critical sectors. Food and ag is one of those. There's health, dams, water, finance, all of these things. The things that are so critical to the social fabric of the United States that if they're impacted at all, they have an outsized impact. And so every critical sector has a government coordinating council, a sector coordinating council, a sector-specific agency, and something called an ISAC, an Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Well, food distribution is adjacent to the food and ag sector, just like oil and gas is adjacent to the energy sector. And oil and gas, and especially the pipelines, weren't really regulated, just like food distribution is not really regulated. Nobody's telling you you have to meet these cybersecurity standards, but that is coming. Now, there is a sector-specific plan there. It's obviously USDA is the sector-specific agency for the food and ag sector, and that's the sector-specific plan. That really applies mainly to farming and all of the technology that today goes into smart farming. There is no guidance for food distributors. So that's one of the reasons we're here talking. So who are these actors, perpetrators, bad guys, whatever you want to call them? You can see that there's this taxonomy of different kinds of, cyber hacker types, whatever we want to call them. And it really starts with just criminals of opportunity. So as an example, there was a water utility in Oldsmar, Florida, and somebody hacked into that water utility and started to fiddle around with the levels of sodium hydroxide that were being added to the water as a disinfectant and ramped it up by a factor of 100 and then left. Now, that was not a criminal. That was not a nation state. That was not somebody that wanted to poison people. That was a doofus. That was somebody who tripped over an open team viewer exposure that they had set up for remote access that had either no password, easy guess password, something like that. That's a criminal of opportunity. That is a threat. They are not very sophisticated, but they are numerous. There are activists. So I don't think activists are a huge problem in food distribution, but they are out there as well. And when a company runs afoul of their stated social norms or objectives, they are starting to come out of the woodwork. There are a few organizations that will, for example, just steal documents and make them public. There's an interesting one called Unicorn Riot that does that. Distributed denial of secrets is another one. So those activists are out there. Then there's competitors, and I hope we never get to a point where competitors are hacking each other to gain competitive advantage. That's more along the intellectual property space, right? They're stealing secrets. Organized crime is your problem. And I would say, too, that nation state and terrorist actors are really getting spun up now to do nothing more than disrupt. Not for the purpose of extortion, not to make money, just disruption for the sake of disruption. In fact, there is a law enforcement bulletin out today. Actually, I think it came out yesterday, talking about how water utilities had better radar up because the chatter they see coming from Al Qaeda and ISIS is targeting them. So these things are really going on. Again, the one that I think applies to food distribution here is organized crime, and it's because of the operational requirements of the business, and the fact that food is perishable, and the fact that it's a supply chain for grocery stores, restaurants, and a lot of things that can be impacted by going to a single distributor and disabling them. So, hope everybody's having a nice day. So, what are the tactics? What do they do? So first of all, and I hope some of this language is starting to become familiar to non-security practitioners, but phishing, sending you something that looks like a document that they want you to read, but you have to give a password before you can read it. Anytime something asks you for a password and you didn't expect it, stop what you're doing. Look very carefully at the information in front of you. Ask a question if you need to, because that right now is epidemic. Phishing and attempting to gain people's passwords so you can just walk into a network rather than developing some, exotic exploit and getting somebody to bite on that and hoping they have the vulnerability that you're cracking open. Nah, you give me a password, I just walk into your network. Something like that is credential stuffing. So there have been lots and lots and lots of passwords disclosed. Yahoo let go of 1 billion of them. They're out there all over the place. We own them. You can buy them. So there are lots of passwords in there that are good representative passwords that people pick. There's also a number of people that will use the same password they used on Yahoo, for example, with your business. And so what these actors will do is they will try to see if you have reused a password. If you did, they're in. The other way they do it is this. They'll take 1 billion passwords and they'll try password number 1 with every one of your users in succession, trying to log into Office 365, Exchange, whatever. Oh, that didn't work. Go to password number 2. Try every user in succession with password number 2. And believe me, by the time you get to password, 10,037, you're going to get some hits for sure. That is called credential stuffing. And it's effective for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's generally run by networks of compromised computers out there acting as bots. And so there's not even an operator there. It's all automated. But number 2, it's successful because nobody will get 3 password failures within 5 minutes and get locked out of the network, and this goes low and slow under the radar. That's going on all the time. Looking for vulnerabilities on the perimeter of your organization. There is reporting out today that says that in general, when a vulnerability is announced, right, a vulnerability is a thing that's gone wrong with a piece of technology, and they're going to fix it by applying an update or a patch. When a vulnerability is announced, 15 minutes later, the scanning of the internet starts to find exposures of that vulnerability. That's how long it takes the bad guys to weaponize these announcements. And the reporting out today is that when the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities were announced, 5 minutes later, the scanning started. Okay, so there is a large population of bad people that want what you have, and they're trying very hard to get it. And then another thing, and this is probably one of the things that I would think is most impactful to food distribution organizations. Somebody sends in a message and it claims to be from somebody either you trust in your organization, or it comes from a vendor, and the vendor says, hey, I need you to pay this invoice, or the message says, hey, we changed our bank account and I need you to change this routing number. Those happen all the time. That is called business email compromise, and it is effective to the tune of $2 billion a year, just pulling it out of organizations in the United States and sending it off to Eastern Europe and Russia. So those are the tactics that I think commonly will be the ones that will be used against food distribution sector. So what can happen from this stuff? Business email compromise, like I said, that's theft. Somebody's just stealing your money. Or they're stealing your vendor's money by having you redirect what bank account it goes into. Ransomware, the scourge of our time. Ransomware is a dumb word that in the cyber business we use to talk about extortion. They're locking up your network, they're making it impossible for you to operate, and then they're hitting you with an extortion demand. That one's really one to avoid. Records disclosure. Unauthorized disclosure of protected records, the dreaded record breach that 50 states have laws. And if you lose the information that meets the definition of personally identifiable information is a combination of public and non-public elements of information that in aggregate can be used for fraud. Your name is not PII, personally identifiable information. Your name and your driver's license number is, right? So it's a combination of things. So on your networks, you have W-2s. You may have safety reports and for events that have happened that maybe in scope of HIPAA in terms of health information that needs to be protected. That stuff is on your network. Probably not a big exposure there. Malicious disruption. Just knocking you down for the sake of knocking you down. That's when we're starting to get into things that nation states and terrorists do because it's of strategic value, not because they want something from you. They just want to mess things up. And then finally, the new bonus is your network is used to be one of those third parties that is the source of attacks against business partners. That one is probably a go out of business event. When you are used to take down your business partners, they tend not to forget that. So now the technologies that I would worry about. So, ransomware is disrupting your organization for the purpose of extortion. Disruption for the sake of disruption is a possibility. If it's an ERP system, you're going to find it real tough to operate. There's other distribution logistics and packaging robotics for some distributors. Quick story: there's a company that produces processed meat, and this company at one time had a processed meat bagging robot attack the other processed meat bagging robots on its floor. And true story, right? So this stuff can actually happen. We've seen it happen. Okay, and then finally, all right, what are we going to do about this? So here's a good way to think about this that pulls it away from all the cyber nonsense. In today's world, having a security problem that starts with a little piece of malware is a foreseeable event. Okay, this is going to happen, and that is the attitude to have. You don't say we're going to keep the bad guys out of the network perfectly. You have to plan on the fact that your prevention is going to fail. Okay, this is the expression. This is a very simple expression for risk. Risk is made of two components: the likelihood that something bad happens, and I just went through a taxonomy of bad things that can happen, and the impact of that thing happening. So we reduce the likelihood of something bad happening with all of the preventive controls that all of the vendors and all, everybody is out there trying to get you to buy: firewalls, antivirus, intrusion prevention, security for your email, et cetera, train your users, manage your vulnerabilities, all those things. Those are all designed to prevent bad things from happening. And they will fail. They will absolutely fail. Our company, we do managed detection response. We also break into computer networks for money. And if we're having any trouble getting into a network, we will throw USB sticks in your parking lot and wait. And it always works. So you will never reduce the likelihood of having one of these events to zero. You will never do that. Unwrap your mind from that. Then you worry about the impact term. Something happened. Well, what was the impact? The help desk cleaned up a workstation real quick. That's one impact. The FBI called and all of our customer records are for sale on the dark web. That's another impact. You get to choose which one of those you're going to live with by minimizing that impact through detection and response. seeing the signal of something bad happening on network, right? So that guy's workstation, never seen it scanning the network for open SMB shares before. We should do something about that, right? So if you have effective detection and response, you will put out a little fire before your house burns down. That's the way to manage risk. You got to focus on both sides of this equation. And with that, Wendy, I'm going to give it back to you.
All right. Thanks, Mike. So what kind of product should our distributors be using to bring down the risk in their business?
Who are you asking?
Any one of you? Scott?
Well, I think I could maybe jump on a little bit here and kind of connect Global 360 technology with the information that is presented from CI. And one thing that we're able to that we're helping companies with is just kind of identifying their security landscape and understanding what all they need to get their arms around as far as just helping them define a perimeter in order to start utilizing some of the pieces that need to be in play to help get the risk equation kind of under control and moving towards the right direction. So whether it's a specific piece of technology, there's lots of good stuff out there. But just kind of understanding, from what your footprint is and what all you might need to manage, get that into place with a kind of second set of eyes. I know everybody's busy running their businesses and stuff, so sometimes this can take a back seat. That's what we're here to help with, whether it's connecting you with CI with their great products, or just generally kind of helping you out with answering your technology questions. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, one good way to kind of focus how you think about, and this is a tough question to answer if you're not, part of this space, and all this secret handshake language is weird. Really, a good way to start, well, the best way to start is, you pull out one of these frameworks, these standards of practice. And the federal government came up with one they call the NIST cybersecurity framework. And the reason it's really applicable, I think, to the food distribution sector is because it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say you must have this control in place. It's an outcome-based framework. It doesn't say do this. It says make this thing happen. So an example is, what's one of the outcomes? Remote access by third parties is managed. Okay, doesn't say how to do that. How you do that is up to you. But if you can make that outcome happen, you're lowering your risk because third parties are a risk. So taking that through, and it's a reasonably simple thing to fill out and self-assess against. But what you end up with is the big steaming pile of stuff you got to fix if you want to align with that framework. And more and more and more companies are asking other companies to provide assurances of security before they do business. Started a long time ago with Health and Human Services, saying that anybody who does business with a covered entity, a hospital, is actually subject to the requirements of HIPAA. So having some kind of security papers to show is becoming almost table stakes for doing business. So if you take yourself through the NIST framework, you end up with a big steaming pile of stuff to fix. That's your corrective action plan right there. Figure out how to budget all of the things that you got to do. We're gonna do this internally ourselves. We're gonna hire consultants to do this. We need to make a capital purchase, and you come out with a budget. And so there you've done your first annual risk assessment. You have your corrective action plan. You know exactly what it's going to cost to pull that stuff off. And anybody who comes knocking, you have papers to show. More importantly, if something happens, you can demonstrate that you were hitting these standards of practice in some way, and your insurance company is really going to want to see those things if there is an event. So, that's, to me, I think that's one of the best ways to go about getting your arms around what do I do, is to assess yourself against this thing that the federal government created for any size business in any sector, because it's widely recognized, and you'll come up with products, work products out of this that provide this defensible security layer that you can show to business partners or to your insurance company.
All right. So the question is come up what is the core technology used in food distribution that is most vulnerable to attack?
I'm gonna let you guys take that one.
Yeah, I'll start. There's, I think Mike hit on it earlier. Obviously, it's whatever's critical for the business. If you can't send invoices, if you can't deliver product, if you can't, receive your product, and that's where things start to break down. So it comes back to that risk assessment part of that. Each system will be a little bit different. The risk tolerance per se for each one of them will be a little bit different. So, obviously you've got the more technology put in place, the more you have to think about all the different impacts and how those vendors are working together to assure those are secure. Whether it's handhelds in the trucks, whether it's your handhelds in the warehouse, and to Mike's point earlier, down to the ERP system, that if ransomware gets there, then you're kind of shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can just think, conceptualize the thing in the company that it would be really hard to do without, where it would grind production or sales or everything to a halt. And for some companies, that could be email. It could be an email server where everything's so heavily reliant on that communication and that access to that. So it really kind of depends on the organization. But I think an important point is that a lot of times these malicious actors will find that in your organization, even if it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, they'll find the thing that's valuable in a lot of ways and specifically attack that, to remove that to make you more likely to pay the ransom, because the pain is so high that you get stuck in the colonial pipeline kind of assessment, where it's like, to pay this is going to be cheaper than to fix the problem through other means. So they're using that extortion kind of framework.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. Way back in the 20th century, right, in the before times, this ransomware thing would hit a single asset computer and lock it up, right? And that was annoying. But as the evolution of not only the tactics used, but the business infrastructure of these operators, once they gain persistence on a network, they're going to be in there. A person will be in your network, not an automated piece of software looking around, and it's going to find the system after they've done research, and they know, you're in a certain business sector. They know what piece of technology is going to be the one that's going to cripple you, and they're going to go after that ERP system for sure. The other thing they do is they go after backups. And if your backups are not properly curated, right? Homeland Security talks about the 3-2-1, right? You want 3 copies of your backups on 2 different kinds of media, and one has to be off-site. One has to be away from the network. That's the way to get back without paying a huge ransom. But as I say, these operators are encrypting backups as well.
Okay, what about financial technology?
That too. I mean, if it's critical to the business, they're going to go after it. And what they do too is they steal records beforehand. So they have this additional, that's called double extortion. Oh, you're just going to rebuild from backup? Well, then we're going to make all these records public, and then you're going to have to do the records breach, and it's going to cost you money anyway. And now, this is interesting. Also, recent reporting, new tactic called triple extortion. They grab your records so that they can hold those hostage. They encrypt your network so that you can't operate, and they extort your business partners, because some of the information that they pull out has to do with business partners. That sounds like a death knell for most businesses to me, if that happens.
Right. And one thing that's I found kind of interesting is how, a lot of times it's easy to feel like you're flying under the radar because maybe you're a smaller company, or you're not necessarily a target in your mind, as far as some of the bigger names out there. Maybe you don't have a huge, what you feel is like a public technology presence as far as websites or e-commerce or things like that. But that sometimes in that situation, you're almost more vulnerable to these types of attacks, just because the company's small enough or growing, or maybe it's a mom and pop shop that doesn't necessarily have the in-house resources to make sure the risk is being managed appropriately, that updates are being applied across their devices on a regular schedule, and patching is done accordingly. So without those resources, a lot of times, even though you think you might be off the radar, your exposure is so much obvious that you're actually low hanging fruit in a lot of ways, where
That's a
they can
good
target
point.
this. They can target this just to, you're there and exposed, and they know if they can take this down, that your company might be hosed. That's pretty powerful, and it's a pretty juicy target. And I feel like a lot of times, once pockets of different industries or can be exposed like that, it gets pretty scary. So I think it's a really good idea just to kind of think about. So I'm so happy we're having this webinar and this discussion, is bringing this topic to Goalbon, to this particular industry, and a little more to help kind of prepare and get the conversation going in ways that we haven't really seen before.
So, Mike, you mentioned that there's obviously no way that 100% we can be protected against cyber attacks.
Yep.
But is there a way to stop phishing attacks or email attacks?
I'm glad you asked. I am seriously glad you asked that. That is a good question, Wendy. So I'm gonna give you part of an answer that is kind of the standard thing that everybody needs to do today, and then I'm gonna give you another part of that answer that I think is harder to do, but even more relevant. So, I spent 10 years in the public sector working in government, and government's got lots of policies, lots of rules, stuff like that. And there was one policy that I tried to champion that I could never get through. I'll come back to that. So the first thing that you can do is enable multi-factor authentication everywhere. And let me just if that's a new term, let me explain what that means. There are 3 different types of factors of authentication that you can use to prove that you are who you say you are. The first of those is something you know. What's an example of that? A password. You know your password. The second one is something that you have, something that you can prove that you possess. That is why a lot of what they call multi-step, multi-factor authentication will use your phone as an additional, as an authentication token, right? Give me the code that came over your phone. You just proved there's not only something you know, your password, there's something you proved you have. I have this phone that I registered, right? And the last one is something you are, right? My iris print, my palm print, my whatever. So multiple factors of authentication like that means that I can give you my password and it won't do you any good, because the types of controls that are set up, in, like, for example, Office 365 and other services, they use this type of technique that if your device changes, if you muff a password, if your location on Earth is somewhere you've never been before, or if it's widely different from where you last logged in and not very much time has gone by, you will be challenged with the additional authentication factor. Set up multi-factor authentication on everything you can. I use it on my Gmail. And all of a sudden, password problem goes off a cliff. Okay. Now, there are threat actors out there that know how to get around multi-factor authentication, and it's exotic, and you would have to be a very high value target for somebody to do that, but that is possible. The second thing is this, and this is much harder, or at least it was a lot harder in the public sector. So in the public sector, just like in lots of corporations, you have a policy. You may not have named it, but it's called de minimis use. And what it means is an employee can use a corporation, government, organization's technology for personal use as long as it doesn't cost extra money, create a security problem, or affect productivity. And I can prove it does all 3. So when I was in government working for the city of Seattle, we took lots and lots and lots of measurements. And I can tell you with a high degree of confidence, because this number has been verified in other reporting, that 40% of the compromised assets in the network were due to the use of personal email. So there's a computer screen in front of you, and over here's Office 365 or Outlook, and it's all cleaned up, and the bad links get dropped on the floor, and you never see the bad attachments. And right next to it is a web browser open to Bubba's email service with no controls at all. What good did it do to spend all this money? None. So you don't have to rescind the policy of de minimis use, which turns out to be a fist fight with unions and things like that. I can tell you with also a good deal of authority. If your policy says personal use on a personal device, right? Facebook lives here, Gmail lives here, right? And we are giving users Wi-Fi networks to associate with when they walk in the door. 40% of that problem goes off a cliff for one policy change. That's a real good deal. That's a real good deal. So if you couple those two things, multi-factor authentication everywhere you can, and reducing the amount of personal use through a policy about personal use on a personal device, most of the problem will go away. And those are the cheapest things you can do to move the needle the furthest in security. So you're all welcome. Don't have to buy a Gizmo, don't have to do anything.
So another question is, what can they install on their systems to get better cybersecurity?
There are 75,000 vendors answering that question every day. What can you install on your system? Make sure you have good endpoint security if all your users are working at home, because you can't monitor them at the network level anymore. Make sure that, to the extent possible, you're monitoring your network. That's not installing something on a computer. That's watching what the network does. If you have, some endpoint security out there, and, you can control all that, right down to where, there's products like Cisco Umbrella and AMP, or the FireEye endpoint, or CrowdStrike, or even Microsoft Defender when it's coupled with Advanced Threat Protection, ATP. Every one of those has the ability to quarantine an asset remotely. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning. All of a sudden, somebody's computer at home is coming over a VPN tunnel, looking around for open connections. Hey, you see that going on? We'll just put them in a little network jail, and we'll come and we'll get back to them later tomorrow and give them a scan and find out what's going on. But what that does is it limits their network connectivity, so that you can still get a hold, and you can still run your scans and things like that, but they can't go talk anywhere else. So, having some kind of endpoint with modern capabilities like that is real important. I would say that. What do you guys typically, install out on your customers?
We generally are more, internally we've got Fortinet products that handle that kind of thing. We haven't connected anybody necessarily with any sorts of any endpoint, specific vendors. We could recommend and go kind of down the list. We'd help source,
source
people and make sure
that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. We for a lot of security stuff, we'd probably refer a lot of the companies to you guys, just because you can specialize so much more, and you're tuned into that so well. But one question I would be how, when you think of managing risk and also kind of prioritizing your investment and your spend to mitigate risk, and what's the most important thing, how you kind of quantify cyber awareness security training for employees, how that fits into that kind of framework.
Yeah, that really is a great question. So the reason you train your employees over and over and over again is because there's no firewall for stupid. Let's just be honest with each other, right? We got to keep telling people.
Wish somebody would invent one. That would be fantastic.
Hey, I smell startup. Right. So, but the reason, there's some absurdities around this, right? You keep training your users, and you hang this bait in front of them, and you give them a bad score if they click on something. And clicking on something to see what's behind there, that's somebody who's curious. That's not the same as somebody who gave up a password, right? So, but setting that aside, so companies like KnowBe4, right, that Phish Me, blah blah blah, they're hugely expensive. And what most organizations find is they train their users over and over, and they can never get past a 3 to 5% recidivism rate. There's always going to be around 3% of the users that blow it. Okay. It only takes one user to blow it. So you're spending all that money to get it down to a point where, well, we're equally vulnerable. And if contrast that with making multi-factor authentication everywhere and limiting personal use to personal devices, Phish My Password, it won't do you any good. You will never have that second factor, right? So, I'm a little jaded again. Now, you do have to do that. You do need to train users, right? And so I'm not a real fan of, the constant, phishing stuff. But hanging messages in front of them, and especially examples of here's the kind of bait that's coming after you. And it's not just your email, it's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's, all over the place, every kind of messaging vehicle we have. And in fact, and maybe some of your customers might be interested in doing this. Every 2 weeks, we do free security awareness training. And we go through lots and lots and lots of examples of here's the stuff, here's what it looks like, here's how you see that this is fake. And every time, and I just drill on this, every time something asks you for a password, stop what you were doing. Look very carefully at the information in front of you and ask a question before you continue. So that's a great question. And, I'm not, to summarize, I'm not a fan of this just constantly phishing your employees, but you do have to message them. And that's one of the that's one of the requirements. The expectation is that you're going to train your users at least once a year. You're going to do an annual risk assessment. You're going to do a penetration test once a year. You're going to do an annual policy review. All that stuff is, pretty standard for just, any security framework you align with. They're all the same anyway.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think sometimes that there's a misconception out there for people that are not in the IT space or the cybersecurity space that there's a kind of a panacea that you can do a couple things and really, you can install something and then you're good. Or you can, if you just trained our employees, that would, we'd be good. We'd be in a better place. And I think it's a lot of times it's a combination of factors that do that. Not anyone's perfect. Any one of these controls are perfect, but if you do this coupled with this coupled with this in a methodological kind of prioritized framework, moving in the right direction, that's the kind of that's what I've kind of realized over time. That it's more about the process and getting the things in place and making sure that you're moving in the right direction, more so than finding the one kind of panacea thing that might be sold that way or out there as the fix all. I think the approach that you guys take with the incident response, kind of finding things that are anomalous behavior, is really next level in a lot of ways, because it doesn't try to get your arms around a problem in a way that's almost impossible in some ways. There's so much changes and so many things. I've got new employees all the time that are starting. It's hard to get them trained up. It's just a constant rat race to kind of keep up with everything. So if you can just watch what's happening on the network, as opposed to trying to manage the perimeter of everything so tightly, is great.
Well, and we saw this past year that perimeter is no longer here. It's all over the place.
And it had to be done like that too, right? Yeah. Where it's not something we're phasing over time. We're going to go to remote work. It was a lot of places. Monday morning, it's Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
And understanding that those things can happen in industries, and the disruptions there, and people are more fluid than ever with more devices than ever. A lot of multiple devices for the amount of devices that we've had internally just for each employee. That were company provided devices has gone up dramatically, more so than we thought it was going to rise. But it's just the amount of needs that are out there for people working mobile, new things, scanning. If you were in the food industry space, scanning for your driver, using GPS for delivery things, or being able to communicate, whether it's a VoIP system for phones because they're out in different places. The understanding your environment and the different things that might be able to touch into is pretty big.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing too, right? So in this NIST framework, there's 5 pieces to it, right? There's identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, right? Those are the sections that this thing is in. Nobody ever gets past the first one. Nobody knows exactly what's on their network, right? I mean, Andy, you were talking about, well, there's all these devices now, and those devices are proliferating even more, right? The IoT that we use to, make the manufacturing process more efficient, to,
Yeah.
telemetry for level of water in a well. I mean, there's all this stuff out all over the place now, and all it's done is blown up the attack surface.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
giving people more doors to pry
There's
open.
now a smart coffee maker in the break room that's able to do different things. And how cool is that? But also,
I mean, it's a great analogy. I mean, if you think about the house, your home, everything's on the internet. I mean, you're connecting your coffee maker and your thermostat and if you look at how many devices are connected to your Wi-Fi, I mean, you'd be surprised. There's 50 of them, and you're like, where did all this come from?
Not me, man. No, veto. Yeah, I have the minimum number of devices in the house possible. I monitor my home network like it was one of our customers, right?
Yeah.
I got a 16-year-old daughter. You
I have
bet
to
I
pull
monitor
Scott's
my
remote
network.
access now. Now I know how insecure his network is from home if he's just going to volunteer.
Right. But I mean, the same thing happens in business. It's like, okay, we're now bringing in telephones, tablets, pushing them out into trucks. Now we got the routing system that's in the truck. All that starts to connect back to home base, and so yeah, it's much the same way.
So Tony is asking, can we get an outline of the topics we're discussing to share with distributors? I think we all have the deck. Anybody can send that deck around.
Absolutely.
And if somebody's got a follow-up question or something like that, we can email that around and handle anybody's queries. Let's see. We got any more questions, Wendy?
No, I think we're getting close to the end of our time, and I know Jake was going to jump on just on a basic level and give us some information on product offerings from CI Security and what's available from you guys.
Yeah.
You going to do that, Jake?
You can do why don't you do the what we do, and then I'll do the how I'm going to help everybody on this call.
Okay. So we do fundamentally two things. We kick bad guys out of computer networks, and we break into computer networks. Okay, those are overly broad buckets, but managed detection and response means that we are going to put a device on your network, and it is going to send us network flow information. So we can't read email. We don't know what web page you're looking at. We don't care. But the flows come over, and we couple those with, alerts coming off your network. Look at me. Something's going to always be saying, look at me. Well, we have people 24/7, 365 that look. If you talk to somebody, a known command and control for organized crime, we know. If there is a login failure from Brazil, we know. So we do all those things for monitoring our customers' network to lower the impact term of the risk expression, right? We put out little fires before they get big. That's what that does. And then our consultants break into your network for penetration tests. They'll do your risk assessment. They'll train your users. They will do a policy review. They will make sure that you are in regulatory compliance or put you on the path to getting there. They'll make sure that you have your papers to show your business partners that you are treating securely well. So it's really the managed security service. We kick the bad guys out of the computer networks, and it's the consulting services, which is everything else. Jake?
Yeah, and one of the things that Mike said there is we do incident response, which means if something really bad happens, call us and we try to get you through it. If you get hit by ransomware, we're in the middle of helping one payroll company right now that's dealing with ransomware. We don't want to meet you that way. We don't want to meet you that way. We want to help you before that happens. And one of the things about the pipeline ransomware attack is, two things have happened. Number one, it's helped companies and organizations think about how do we avoid that happening to us? What are the steps we can take now? There's no 100% way, but I can improve my security posture. So a couple of things. Number one, if you work on an IT team and you need to help convince your board that there's something to do, shoot me an email. And we just created an executive briefing, and you can fill it out and then you can talk about it widely. It's in totally normal speak, not Mike Hamilton infosec speak. Yeah, that's right. That's what I said. But in totally normal speak, so normal people can understand it. Normal people can't understand Mike. The other thing is, one of the things that we do is we offer a bunch of different assessments. One of them is something that one of our other founders, Fred, came up with a couple years ago, and it's called the 13-point assessment. And it is a 60-minute, like, we ask you a bunch of questions about your org, and we tell you just snapshot of where you are. Because of the pipeline thing, some folks said to us, hey, can you just do that for free for a little bit? So for people who come to webinars and the like, we're doing it at no cost for the next couple of months. And so if you're interested in that, we can do that. Just email me, same email address, and I'll set you up, and we'll do it along with Gold Bond here, so everybody knows what's going on, and we can give you a snapshot of where you are. And lastly is, I mentioned the survey. Every time we do a webinar, we do a survey, and we want to know how we're doing. We want to know if this is helpful. And in the survey, I also put a question about if you want the 13-point assessment, so you can answer that in there. Also, as you fill out the survey, you can, I almost posted the wrong link, and that would be embarrassing for a security company now, wouldn't it? There you go. Survey link is in the chat there. And if you fill out the survey, you have a chance to get a gift card in the end, or we started this in the pandemic, you can donate your gift card to a food bank. So just let us know, but we'd really appreciate you taking the survey. And Charles says, how do you know your security is safe? Like SolarWinds.
I'll answer that.
Oh, Mr. InfoSec.
Yeah, the one that nobody understands.
Go ahead,
Mike. So that's actually a good question, right? You have products that you bought from vendors, and what happens when their stuff goes bad and you have no way to know that, and that causes you to get crunched. This is why the federal government is saying supply chain, supply chain, supply chain. And what we're going to come to is products are going to have the equivalent of a bill of lading. And they're going to know exactly all the components that went into them, like an open source SSL library or something like that that's in there. And they're going to have to map that provenance all the way back so that there's changes in the components. Everything gets folded in. And this is going to be a bit of a heavy lift, but the way the federal government can do this is they use the power of the purse. They say, we, the federal government, who spends hundreds of billions of dollars, will not buy from you unless you do it this way. And everybody is going to do it that way because we're capitalists. If you give people a chance to make more money by saying, buy my product because it's more secure than that product, that's exactly what they're going to do. And the federal government's going to force that with power of the purse.
But I think one of his questions, Mike, is he says, is that there today? So two things. One is that there today, and two, Mike, how do if Charles is looking to work with us, how does he know we haven't been popped?
Because I'm still standing. Well, so I think in today's world, before the federal government does that, and you get the underwriter lab, seal of approval on every product, you set up your own third-party risk management, and it's I wouldn't say it's a hugely heavy lift, but there's process that you need to implement there, and every one of your vendors, you're going to have to make sure that they jump through some hoops for you.
And I'll also say, SolarWinds is a very, very, very large company. And some of the negatives of working with a very, very, very large company is they have a lot of people, and some of those people make mistakes. And Mike and I can tell you stories of, seeing passwords in some very, very large companies that is name of company 123. Like, they do stupid stuff. We are not a 30,000 person security company. We have a manageable number of people all in the United States. And Mike is the CISO and founder, and he doesn't even let me buy marketing products that he doesn't put the screws on. So anyone I hire in marketing, Mike gives them a massive questionnaire, and they say, really? And we say, really? So, that's one of the ways we know.
As a testimonial, we before we had this engagement that we currently have with you guys, with webinar stuff, we use you guys internally as for our focused security assessment, among some other stuff. And it was really eye-opening for me because I'm thinking, that's kind of my domain, and I'm going to talk to this guy, and we're going to go through some stuff. But the interviews that he had, and it's kind of a level up from the free offering, I believe, that that you guys have. But the interviews with employees, as I'm kind of sitting in, and he's just asking, our HR or receptionists things that I never even thought about, like the amount of third-party apps they were using, or services and solution things, apps or websites they might use for hiring, posting a job, and that kind of flow and those processes that totally escaped what we were using. Of course, we'll let people browse the internet, but you don't realize that maybe your HR department is using Monster and these other things that could be leaked, could be threats, or anything else that are out there that IT might not even be aware about. You might even not even know these things are going around as your company, as your employees grow and they're busy and they're trying to be efficient and productive. But that was an eye opener of how much of our environment that we didn't even know that the business was using, utilizing third party applications in a way. So all good stuff. These guys are great.
Yeah, thanks for that. And you're right. The 13-point assessment I talked about is not meant to replace a full security assessment. It's all right, like this big thing happened and I need to take some action right now. What can I do real quick? And good to hear that the assessment was good for you all, and we identified a lot of things. Mike really makes it not fun for me to buy any marketing software. It's true. So yes, so the surveys in the chat there. That is really important to us that you take it, because we want to know how we're doing, and we want to be able to donate to food banks or send you a gift certificate. This has been awesome. Any last questions anyone want to put in the chat? Other than that, I think we'll let Wendy play us out. Wendy, you have a song ready?
You don't want to hear me sing. No, I just want to say thank you for this information. Thank you for participating today. And as a reminder, this will be posted on the Gold Bond Forum for anybody that wants to go back and review. And of course, reach out to any one of us with any questions, and we will get you taken care of. Oh, something just came in the chat.
Oh, they're just saying thanks.
Okay.
We'll take that. We appreciate it. And again, if you need anything, email me. I'm really easy to find. It's just jake@ci.security. And I can hook anybody up with whatever they need, even t-shirts. So thanks, everybody.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.